5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And liftoff as Falcon 9 and Cargo Dragon take flight, bound for the International Space Station with fresh supplies and research, helping to maintain our human presence in space as the station celebrates its 20th anniversary. Good afternoon, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. I am Joshua Santoro with NASA Public Affairs here at the Kennedy Space Center. A big congratulations to SpaceX on another successful launch and deployment of the Dragon in orbit on its way to the International Space Station. Their commercial resupply services 16 mission launched at 1:16 and 16 seconds Eastern this afternoon and is on its way there now with a scheduled rendezvous of Saturday morning at 6 a.m. Today, I am joined by Joel Montalbano, Deputy International Space Station Program Manager from NASA's Johnson Space Center, and Hans Koenigsmann, Vice President of Build and Flight Reliability at SpaceX. We will begin today by taking statements from Joel and Hans. So let me go ahead and pass it over to you, Joel.
Okay, well, welcome again to the SpaceX 16 post-launch press briefing. Had an incredible launch. And so this vehicle delivering over 5,600 pounds of science, research, and maintenance hardware to the International Space Station. And it's a huge amount of work across the NASA centers as well as with the SpaceX team. We talked at the pre-launch about some work we were doing with some cargo handling. And late Monday evening, NASA requested a 24-hour delay to the SpaceX team for us to go ahead and replace some mice hardware that had been contaminated that we talked about earlier with some mold. We went ahead and brought the hardware in from the Ames Research Center, arrived around 1 a.m. Tuesday morning. The teams worked through the night and the morning, and then handed over the hardware to the SpaceX team around noon Tuesday. And since then was a flawless countdown to the launch you saw earlier today. Just incredible. This was the fourth launch in 3 weeks to the International Space Station, keeping up the busy pace of 2018. Looking forward, we have a capture of the Dragon spacecraft on Saturday morning, approximately 6 a.m. Eastern Time. And all indications from the Dragon vehicle is it's performing nominally, and we have 100% clean spacecraft on its way to the International Space Station and the 6 crew members on board. Looking forward, we also have a Russian EVA scheduled for December 11th, and then a Soyuz landing scheduled for December 20th. And that'll round out those activities for vehicles coming up and down as well as EVAs for this year. With that, I'll hand it back over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Joel. And I'll just pass it back over to you, Hans.
Yeah, thank you. Great launch, beautiful descent, and then successful payload separation a minute after shutdown on the second stage. Dragon is on the way. It deployed the solar arrays. Looks very healthy. It's going to deploy the GNC bay door I guess right around that time frame, maybe in the next 10 minutes or something like that, and then continue to phase the orbit and get closer to the ISS, and then, as we heard, dock on Saturday morning for another successful Dragon mission. Now, you probably wonder about the first stage. We had a landing anomaly on the first stage, and I do have a video for you that I can comment over so we can see what happened. Thank you. So this is the view from the vehicle. You see the grid fins basically, and they appear to not move anymore. They actually roll over to the side, and the vehicle starts rolling pretty rapidly there. It actually targets a landing point in the water if it loses control. So in other words, it's still trying to stay away from land. It's trying to stay safe. And you see the landing burn there. It's really amazing on how it actually stops rotating at the very end almost and deploys the legs and then just lands on the water. Give it a second here. Still rotating, and then there, and lands, and then it does sink in and fall over and continues to work. And In fact, it went through the entire safing sequence. The vehicle performed a sequence that basically vents the tanks and makes it safe so people can approach it. It went through the safing sequence. The flight computer was continued to run. When I left the launch control earlier, it was still functioning and we still got data intermittently because it is so low to the ground. But nevertheless, we got data. And we were preparing a tow so we can get it, safely into the harbor and then recover it. So it looks like what happened is some malfunction with the grid fins, like I said earlier. The important part here is we have a safety function on board that makes sure that the vehicle does not go on land until everything's okay, and that worked perfectly. It stayed off the land, basically. It kept the, it avoids both the land and, even if it is on land, it avoids buildings. It knows where buildings are, so it's pretty smart in that aspect. And I would say, in terms of public safety, the vehicle kept well away from anything that where it could pose even the slightest risk to population or property. So public safety was well protected here, and as much as we are disappointed in this missed landing or landing in the water rather instead of land, it shows the system overall knows how to recover from certain malfunctions. Now, we also had quite a success train here. We had 11 out of 11 landing boosters on land that worked here, and that's pretty good. We had a couple early missed landings, but that was part of our development. And so in total, we recovered 32 first stage boosters. And actually, we will recover this one too, so it's going to be 33 at that point in time. So, and then not to forget, I mean, this is actually a great day in the sense we did deliver Dragon. It's on the way to the station, and we will continue the mission and hopefully berth at the station on Saturday morning then. Yeah, I want to thank actually again the SpaceX team, customer NASA, Air Force, FAA for their support, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hans. At this time, we will take questions. I'll be calling on you. When you have a question, please raise your hand. Please wait for the microphone. And when you do begin to speak, please identify yourself and your affiliation, and then to whom you're asking the question. We'll start up here in the front row.
Chris Gebhardt with NASA Spaceflight. So I know it's a 2-day later than planned rendezvous with the station for the slip. Does that at all affect the come-home date for Dragon in January? And any holiday items on board for the crew that you can talk about since it is December?
So as far as the end of the mission, we're still keeping the planned end of mission date. We're always look at the progress of the mission, and based on the science and research going on board, we may adjust one way or another. But today, the launch delay in itself doesn't result in a change in landing. As far as we did fly some extra food. Some Christmas-type food for the crew. Standard things, candied yams, turkey, corn, green bean casserole, some Christmas cookies, standard stuff like that. But other than that, that's what we have on board.
We'll come up here to the front.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Space Up Close for Hans. I had a question. This landing sequence was totally autonomous. Was there any chance for human intervention? Did you consider it? And what changes are you going to make in this booster and in your abort scenarios? Thanks.
So the landing sequence is autonomous, but it does have certain branches if things don't work to this kind of situation. So it is a little bit more complex than just doing the same thing over and over again. It has decision points, and if things don't work out, then it doesn't go for the land landing, like in this particular case, for example. Oh, from now on, we have to actually look into this and figure out what went wrong. I think it's too early to say we need to switch this part out or that part out, but I'm pretty sure it's going to result in potentially adding a backup to supply the grid fins with hydraulic power, for example, and stuff like that. So there are certain areas are single string at this point in time. It was a development initially, and we might add redundancy to it, for example. That would be a simple solution. But I think I don't think it's. I think we need to actually investigate that first and figure out what actually was wrong and what is the smartest solution and corrective action going forward.
We'll take back here in the second row.
Hi, Bill Horowitz, CBS News for Hans. Can you refresh our memories on how the targeting works for this? In other words, at what point during a descent do you target the landing on the pad versus where you're targeting to go offshore, and where that decision point comes in?
So the decision point is after the entry burn, but I'm not quite sure how much after that. Basically, what happens is just based on physics, we keep the landing point, or it's called an impact point. Basically, this is where you would land if you do nothing. We keep it off the land for a while, and then as the landing burn goes on, we move that burn, and it actually is nominal. Then we would move that impact point further over to the landing zone.
But that moving the impact point to the landing zone, that's happening during the landing burn. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, up here in the second row.
Hi, Brendan Byrne with WMFE. This is for Joel. Can you walk us through the unpacking process when it gets there? Are there certain things that have a priority? Are the mice coming off first? Can you walk us through how long it's going to take to get that unloaded?
So the mice will be priority, and we have some other high priority science that's temperature, has some temperature constraints. We'll get all that high priority science out. There's also some fresh fruit for the crew. I expect we'll get that out fairly quickly, but the science is going to be the priority, getting that out fairly quickly, right after, as soon as we can get it birthed, and depending on, the timeline of the day, but the mice are going to be the priority there.
All right, we'll go front row over here.
This is for Hans. Could you elaborate, where will the booster go from here, and could it potentially be reused in the future?
So I know that Elon tweeted something to that effect. I think we got to look at the booster and see how it holds up after some time in the water. We will tow it and then find a way to get it back on land. But I don't think I have any details when that happens, how that happens. Yeah.
We do have a phone bridge set up, and we're going to go to the phones now. Irene Klotz.
Thanks so much. Hans, I was wondering if the investigation into the landing issue will impact preparations or plans for the GPS-3 or the last Iridium flight, and if you can just give us an update on where those stand. Thanks.
Yeah, so I don't think this has any impact on GPS-3, although, of course, we need to make sure that there is nothing that has overlap, but I believe there's none, and this is based primarily on the fact that GPS is not a landing booster. It doesn't have the landing hardware, or the majority of the landing hardware, and so it should not affect that particular launch. From what I can tell, that launch is on time. I looked at the booster yesterday. It's in great shape and getting integrated in the hangar.
We're going to go to the phone once more for Stephen Clark.
Hi, Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now. A couple of questions for Hans. Can you refresh my memory on whether the first stage coming back to land carries an autonomous flight termination system, or is the range standing by to intervene if necessary, if these multiple layers of contingency capabilities don't put the rocket on a trajectory away from something important? And you mentioned the next launch will not have a landing, and I was curious, why is that? Thanks.
So first question, FTS system. There's an FTS system, an autonomous flight termination system on this booster. It's both on the booster and on the second stage. That makes sure that we don't exceed the limits of the range. So that. In addition to that, like I said, we have this algorithm on board that steers the vehicle away from land. So there was no necessity of the FTS system to respond to this at this point in time on the last flight. And regarding GPS not landing, I think this is a customer requirement to have all the performance for the mission, the challenging mission.
We're going to go once more to the phone to James Dean.
Thanks so much. I think you just answered a couple of questions that I had, so I'll veer away from the landing stuff for a moment. Hans, you had mentioned pre-launch that you didn't expect to slow your launch pace at all next year. Can you tell us, just looking ahead into next year, about how many launches are you expecting to perform next year in total, and speak at all also just to the significance of potentially launching those astronauts for the first time?
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously, the launch rate itself, I don't think it changes significantly. We're now at, I think we're now 20, another record, yeah. So we're now 20. We have targeted 18 for the next year, but everyone's one more or one less over the year that can easily happen. So I think it's roughly the same launch rate. And then, of course, as you pointed out, astronauts are a big deal. SpaceX is still on schedule with the Demo 1 mission and in-flight abort and the Demo 2 missions. So that's going to be a major effort on our side, total focus on our side on astronaut safety and getting those missions right. And I'm really looking forward to that.
We'll come back up to the front row.
Bill Jelen with We Report Space. For the Crew Dragon, you mentioned the other day that it's possible to get the Dragon there in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, but Soyuz got there in 6 days. With the 6 hours. With the Crew Dragon, how long will it take? Will you alter the trajectory to be able to get there quicker than like today, where it's taking 3 days to catch up to the ISS?
So you can actually have shorter phasing times. I think that's basically a function of how high you insert and how much of a burn you want to have, and it takes some time between the burns. I don't think we're going to go as short as Soyuz, but I have to admit I don't know the exact time, and I asked myself that question yesterday too. I didn't follow up because I was busy with this launch, so I will. I will look into this and how much time we have. I have in my head that we have a day or something like that, like a normal short phasing for Dragon, but this is totally unconfirmed. It's just what I have in my head.
And when you have the shorter phasing, you limit your launch days. And so
Right.
the longer phasing gives you multiple launch opportunities. Mm-hmm. If you have a real short phasing, like the Soyuz spacecraft, which launched Monday morning, if they were to scrub, they could not go the next day and still do a 6-orbit rendezvous. They'd have to defer to the 34-orbit rendezvous. And it'd be similar in this case, too. It's physics related, so regardless of where the vehicle launches.
I do want to make sure we try and keep questions to this mission and today's mission, but we'll go back here to the second row.
Stephen Young with Spaceflight Now. Just to follow up on Stephen's question about the flight termination system, Hans, was it active during the landing?
The flight termination system is shut down at one point in time when the impact point or when the vehicle basically is in an area that can't get out anymore. So it can't get out to the public anymore. And that happens, I want to say, shortly after the entry burn.
And one quick follow-up. Do you know how far offshore the booster landed?
I've heard about 2 miles.
Any more questions in the room? All right, we're going to go to the phone. Tim, forgive me, I missed your last name, Tim.
Hello, this is Tim Fernholz from Quartz. I just wanted to follow up on the rocket today. I wanted to check in and see if it had the new configuration of COPVs that SpaceX needs to demo ahead of launching astronauts for NASA.
It does on the second stage.
And will that count towards the 7 demonstrations that SpaceX needs to do to be certified to fly astronauts this year?
I think it does.
Great, thank you.
We'll go back to the phone with Irene Klotz.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up my other question. If Hans, if you can give us an update on the Iridium flight preparations too, and any impacts from this landing issue. Thanks.
So the Iridium flight is, I think, just early next year at this point in time, and I do not anticipate any impacts on the schedule here. We have enough time between now and then to bring in corrective actions and to make sure that we land that booster safely, I believe, on a drone ship in this case. This is a, I'm not totally sure it's a drone ship landing, but I think it is. So just off the top of my head, I don't anticipate any issues based on the landing issue we had today impacting the schedule and the flight of the Iridium booster.
We're going to go back to the phones. James Dean.
Hi, thanks again. Hans, I wondered if you could just tell us approximately what was the peak altitude and speed that the booster reached, and do you know about how high up it was when the, the grid fin anomaly and spinning started to occur?
I can answer your first question. The apogee is typically at 135 kilometers, and I think, and that's based on shutdown is right around 1,800 meters per second. The beginning of the anomaly is traceable back to shortly after the entry burn, I believe. Honestly, I think that's a little bit premature to answer. So I would probably say, let us look into this and figure out when exactly it started, because sometimes things lead to other things on these systems, and so I don't want to give you the wrong information now. It might have started earlier, but it shows in the video. I want to say after the entry burn, but I'm not sure how much it is actually. So it's just happened 2 hours ago.
We'll go back to the second row here.
Bill Horowitz, CBS again for Hans. I'm sorry. Can you clarify? I didn't understand what you were saying about COPVs and being certified to fly astronauts. Can you give us a better breakdown of where you stand on that?
So on the COPV front, we basically had a modification of the COPV for crew, and these COPVs are phased in slowly. And all I said in the earlier answer is that the second stage contained the new upgraded COPV, and it does count towards a demonstration of 7 flights prior to demo.
And was this the first flight, or how many flights have you done with these?
No, I flew already on S-Hale last launch from here.
Okay, so
I'm not sure it flew from Vandenberg. I don't know. I don't remember that.
So at least 2 at this point with
Yes.
today's launch.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Come up here to the front row.
Matt Haskell, the Aerospace Geek, and my question is for Hans. You mentioned the implementation of corrections for Iridium. With that launch being farther away, is there a possibility that the implementation of corrections for DM1 could cause a slip to the right?
So I'm not sure I understand. Iridium comes still before Demo 1, or pretty close, so let's say it this way. But regardless, whatever will be corrected on Iridium will also be corrected on Demo 1. Yeah.
Up here in the front row, on the corner.
So that was a great video watching the roll, basically 1 roll a second, and you were able to correct that. What flight algorithms were trying to anticipate a roll? Like, we've never seen a roll before. Was that built in that might possibly happen and you try and correct it? What systems were still working to stop that roll before landing?
Honestly, I'm a little bit puzzled by that myself. So one thing is when you put the legs down, obviously you change the moment of inertia, so you slow the roll down. And I think it could be just that. It's a single engine burning at that time, yeah. So you can't do a lot on roll, but you can stabilize the other 2 axes, and that's what I see there. I see a stabilization and pitch and yaw, so it doesn't gyrate as wildly as it did before. So from just looking at the video, the perspective narrows to a more focused area. So I think that's one effect, and then the other effect could be that the landing legs just, like when you put the arms out and rotate on a chair. But like I said, I think I need to look at data. We need to investigate that in detail, make sure we cover everything, and then perform corrective action if necessary, and get it done.
We're going to go back to the phone for Stephen Clark.
Hi, my questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Any more questions here in the room? One more?
Brendan Byrne with WMFE again. This one, again, for Joel. With utilizing SpaceX Dragon to return samples from the International Space Station, can you talk about how that changes the scope of the science that can be done on the International Space Station and kind of how you plan to put these experiments up there?
So the ability of SpaceX to bring home science is incredible. It's the scientists, they have their experiments, they fly, they go, they work, they talk to the astronauts as we do these experiments on board, but they want the results back in their labs. They want to go ahead and look and do some additional analysis, some additional work that we can expand what we've done on Space Station and add to that science. And so bringing those samples back to the scientists is a clear enhancement that the SpaceX vehicle brings us. The vehicle lands off the coast, the Pacific coast. We hand over, a lot of times we hand over the experiments directly to the principal investigators at the port, and then go right to their labs that day, within a few hours, and go ahead and continue that science. So it's a huge capability that we look forward to every SpaceX launch and landing.
Up here in the front.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. First, congratulations again to both of you. For Joel, the contamination of the food bars, I wonder, first of all, it sounded like they came later than you initially expected from the pre-launch briefing. Is that true? And did you consider whether some other food items, maybe even for the astronauts, might be contaminated? Because you found this contamination, was there a chance of a wider contamination? Thanks.
So to answer your first question, we flew this hardware back from the Ames Research Center in California. So it just took some time to coordinate all the logistics. We were hoping that we were going to be able to meet the December 4th launch date. But when you laid everything out on the timeline, we didn't want to rush and go do something that was going to cause an additional problem once we got on orbit. So it was just made sense to go ahead and take that extra time. It was a little later. We were hoping to get a flight out of California a little earlier, but when you put all the timelines together and get everybody here, we were also asking people to work in the middle of the night, so you don't want to rush that. People are off their normal sleep schedule, so just taking the time was the right thing. As far as the other food, this is processed differently, and so it's a different facility, different food. There's no issue with the current astronaut food that's on board or that was delivered by the SpaceX.
All right, good. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll throw in one more for Joel. It's my understanding that with the launch coming now, you won't be able to do the battery EVAs before the MS-09 crew comes down. Do you know when approximately you might be able to pull those off, the two solar array battery installs?
Yeah, it's early next year. I want to say February or March. It'll be some time. We had a contingency plan if we didn't get a SpaceX launch to go ahead and plan for and do this December. But with this crew up there and then the science priorities we had, when you lay all the mission priorities out, it made sense to go ahead and push those. But I believe it's March, but it might be as early as February. Sure.
Any more questions here? One in the back.
My name's Adam Byerly with Florida Coast Magazine. I just had one additional question with the food contamination. In light of that, is it compartmentalized or isolated in a sense that once you fix that issue, that was all that had to be done? Or is there a whole checklist of things that have to take place after that to check all the other experiments and cargo after that, since you have to go back in the capsule of the spacecraft?
Again, since this was processed at a separate facility, we'll go ahead and look at our processing facility, or go ahead and look at the facility there that we process it. It doesn't affect other hardware that was being planned on board. But as far as why did it happen, how did it happen, we're going back, did we do something different? Is there, what we're looking at all the processes that prepared it for this mission and seeing what we did different than we've done in the past. So we just haven't had a chance to go through all that yet.
From that, then nothing else has to be checked. Once that was fixed, that was it. Seal it back up, and it's ready to go.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. That's all we have time for today. Joel, I want to thank you. We'll be watching closely for Expeditions 57 and 58 for the science that gets to happen, and obviously the astronauts getting their delivery. Hans, appreciate your candor today and joining us. Thank you for delivering our payloads. So go Dragon and go Space Station. That's going to be all. Thank you all for being here. Please be sure to tune in Saturday morning. We are planning to begin coverage for capture and berthing at 4:30 a.m. Eastern, with capture scheduled for 6 a.m. Eastern on Saturday morning. You can view that live online at nasa.gov/live. And for updates on this mission, please visit nasa.gov, as well as nasa.gov/station and nasa.gov/SpaceX for more on today's mission. For more on all things Space Station, again, nasa.gov/station. And you can follow us online, social media, at NASA and at SpaceX. And that's all. We'll see you next time.